Camille, thank you so much for joining us.
I am glad I could be here.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. This is going to be, I know, such a great conversation. What an amazing book. And your book, Soil, The Story of a Black Mother's Garden, is such a beautiful tribute to your mom. And it really helped me to think of resiliency and thriving in a really different way. So, would you share what motivated you to write Soil and why tell this story now?
Yeah, I'm I'm interested that you single out my mom as the person that it's a tribute to, because I do um, think in the book about my relationship with her and how that has affected, my own ideas about mothering my daughter and working the land. But I think it's not just my mother. For me, from from really early in the process of writing this book, I realized that I was thinking about the multi-directionality of
Mm,
life, that we come from some histories and we pass along histories, and just as the ways that perennial plants root and regenerate and root and regenerate, um, so many of my community members have modeled for me ways of working in the world for the world, in just and loving ways. And so how am I embodying that set of models myself in my daily actions, and then how am I modeling that for my daughter, um, became one of the really key questions for me throughout the process of the
mhm.
book.
So you were saying that one of the key processes for your book was thinking about your relationship with your daughter and kind of this multi-generational or transgenerational relationship between the earth and garden. So yeah, please share a little more about that.
Oh, I like that word you use, transgenerational, right? And because it allows that flow to be moving in so many different directions and across time and space. The book is complex in its organization. So that became in writing it, one of the big challenges was to figure out
Mm,
how to write this story in a way that you could read, that you're not going to get lost and tossed all over the place and frustrated by that, but that remain true to the world as I experience it, which is all times existing, um, in the present. And so it became a really fun process to try and figure out how to create a chronological narrative at the same
mm-hmm.
time that I created this transgenerational narrative as well. And that, for me as a writer, writing sometimes difficult material,
Yes.
sometimes material that needed research or care, a lot of investigation to figure out how to answer complicated questions. Um, Having that challenge of how to also, um, practically and compellingly convey this sense of, um, multiple possibilities of the direction of love and interest and import,
Mm,
in terms of where stories live and when they live, and
mm-hmm.
why, became really interesting. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit woozy right now. I have an awful virus. And so I have been living a little bit more on NyQuil and DayQuil than I normally do. So
Understood.
I might be like talking about time and multi-generationality and stuff. It's like I may sound more like I'm talking about trying to describe a dream than, um,
Well, but you know what,
than
but
I would
Camille,
like
it's
to.
totally okay, because one of the cool things about Toward Inclusive Excellence is that we have covered the span of discourse and scholarship and knowledge across all of those boundaries. And my colleagues, many of whom are working in academic libraries, we get it. So it's totally okay. And we at Toward Inclusive Excellence, we appreciate you giving us your time, because it is a lot going around in the universe right now in terms of various contagions. So
Mhm.
thank you for giving us this really great information. It's totally good.
Yeah. Did I do anything towards answering your question? I
You
can
did.
I can take another stab at it. I'm
You
sorry.
did, yeah, but I'm really also interested in digging in a little more around your core motivations,
Right.
right, for soil at this moment, because you worked on the book. So it really chronicles like 7 years of you building your garden, and you know, the whole agency around that. And we'll talk more about some of the interesting community complications that you ran into. But what was really what motivated you, particularly as a poet, particularly when I look at the corpus of your work, what was the real driver for doing soil right now?
Right. Okay. So I have something like a succinct answer for that. I had written a successful fellowship proposal for a Guggenheim Fellowship that I won in 2019, which meant that the grant paid out in 2020. And so
Mm,
that was
mm-hmm.
fantastic. Starting in January of 2020, I had a year of leave from teaching, and I was supposed to be writing a book about what grew up from the land around me, which I thought was
Got
going to
it.
be a book of poetry. Um, and I thought that it was essentially going to be a pretty straight book of nature poems about, what was in my garden and
Mm-hmm.
such. And 2020 happened to us.
Yeah.
And as 2020 happened to us, everything that I thought was normal wasn't normal anymore. And the plans that I had to be radically readjusted. And my ways of seeing and understanding and coping with the world had to be radically readjusted. Among the things that I had to shift was the fact that I had to become the primary caregiver. My husband did not have a year of teaching leave, and
Yeah.
had classes of 100 students that he had to all of a sudden, over a 4-day break, pivot to an online format. So during his tenure year, his tenure packet year. So he was non-existent, husband who,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he was doing what he needed to be doing. And so it was me and my daughter that spring. And I was trying to oversee her homeschooling and um, write, but
Yeah.
I didn't have the time and space to write in the way that I thought that I was going to. And um, I found myself writing prose more than poetry. And I found myself chafing
Mm,
against the tradition of environmental literature that I thought I was writing into, but which I
mm-hmm.
couldn't write into all of a sudden,
Yeah.
in these new with these new scenarios around me. So the things that had already set me apart from a lot of the tradition of environmental writing, namely being Black, um, got exponentially more so because now I'm this caregiving parent. I wasn't, we did actually go for hikes and stuff sometimes because we live in Colorado. It's somewhat more accessible than that is for a lot of people, but like not every day we didn't get to do that because she had to like be back on the computer for homeschooling, blah blah blah, whatever
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And so like all of a sudden I'm trying to write about the wild, wonderful world, but most of the time I'm just in my suburban house
Mm-hmm.
starting to name the bunnies because we're just staring out the window so long.
I did that too. I had a rabbit named Bob. Wild rabbit. And he came and saw me every day.
Yeah, they're there. They've been there. And
Right.
all of a sudden I was paying attention to them and thinking, well, wait, why doesn't that count? Why can't this count? Why can't somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
actively mothering, who's at home in a house, count? And also, wow, look over there in that section of the yard where we have been working towards actively rewilding this landscape, there's a lot. I have a lot more neighbors to observe than over there
Mm-hmm.
in these really homogenous, desolate, plain old lawn sections.
Yeah.
And so my writing then, I just started writing what right? Like I just started writing what I was seeing and what I was experiencing and asking myself why this version of interacting with the greater than human world, why is it that I am wondering whether or not it counts?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so as I kind of kept moving through that, the book just radically shifted from my initial expectations into something I'm really excited about in terms of its way of thinking about how I can live in a connected, honest, caring way,
Mm.
without
Yeah.
having to pretend to be somebody who doesn't have ties to
Yeah.
other people.
Mm-hmm. 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 And to the earth, right? Because I think for many of us, the pandemic recentered our focus towards connection to the natural world. In ways in which, to your really good point earlier, the rabbits, the sky, the trees, all of that was always there, but in the height of our busyness, I will say for myself, I know I wasn't really paying attention to it. Like I appreciated it from a kind of distant standpoint, but it really did take the pandemic for me to stop and appreciate it differently. And it's really interesting to hear that some of that was a core motivator for soil. That's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think also though that my experience of the sort of foundational environmental literary texts that like I was trained up at as canonical text are
Mhm.
incredibly misanthropic. Like they're
Yes,
like
they
in
are.
order, like they may be writers who were greatly in love with the world and deeply connected with the greater than human world, but there's not a other single person present in the work. And I
Right.
do not understand how we're going to figure out workable solutions if the only answer is you either love the natural world or you love people. Like you can't, it
Right.
cannot
Right.
be an either or question.
Right. Right. And it's fascinating, in thinking about this really interesting point that you draw, like the binaryism of it. Like, why is it that way? It doesn't make any sense.
And because it's that way, and because it doesn't make any sense, a lot of people just assume that they have no place in the
Right.
environmental movement because the
Right.
environmental movement has no place for people. And so
Right.
then they're like, well, but
Right.
I got people in my life. I can't be walking out in the woods by myself. And so that we lose huge like readerships, workers, community
Yeah.
possibilities
Yes.
by just continuing this idea that you just got to wander off by yourself. And so that I just didn't want my book to participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is amazing that it recenters all of this element that you just spoke so eloquently about around the recentering of the human aspect of engagement with the natural world, because the story for soil for me is really very much at that nexus of our understanding of what it means to be a Black woman and to have agency, particularly over land and space, which, at least to me, I think of that as a form of environmental justice. And so, did environmental justice really guide how you approach to writing soil, like as a theme, or did it kind of emerge, as post facto, as you were kind of wrapping up the book, and you're like, yeah, this really is centered within these broader principles of environmental justice.
I think environmental justice has been at the center of my ethics for a long
Mm,
time. And
mm-hmm.
so is it is endemic to the book Soil because it's central to my core, my ethical moral core. And I don't understand the difference between
Got
social
it. Right.
justice and environmental
Right.
justice,
Right. Right.
and the ethics of those questions. But I think that sometimes when I was writing Soil, I had to slow down a little bit because when something is a given to me, I cannot assume that it will be a given to everybody else. And
Right.
so
Excellent point. Mm-hmm.
I did sometimes have to stop and say, this is why, or this is how I see these things working in the world. And so Soil ends up, it's a memoir of our rebuilding of this garden, as you say, and the bulk of it was written in 2020, and so it also chronicles that um, crazy year from really from like the beginning of the first blooms until the first hard frost of
Mm-hmm.
that year.
Mm-hmm.
So one real growing season. And so in that sense, like that's what the story is about. But also there ends up being all this cultural criticism, and I'll talk about major books and describe why I have issues with them, and or I will describe other key historical figures or moments that I just can't assume that everybody knows, right? I mean,
Right. That's
as an
right.
example, there's Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and in passing, at one point in the book, I describe what happens in that book, just in case you don't happen to know that. But later in the book, I also mention what was happening in Virginia right around the same time that Annie Dillard was writing Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And one of my real issues with the book is the fact that Dillard never engages with the fact that they were such revolutionarily major cultural changes going on in her county
Mm,
at the same time that she's writing this book, wandering around the world.
yeah.
I want my world integrated, which is a sort of,
Well,
I laugh when I say
well,
that, right? Like,
speak on that,
you
ma'am.
know, right? Like that happens to be what was going on. I was like one of the most major integration court cases in American history was happening right then.
Yes,
There was integration happening on the campus where she was living. It was just cultural turmoil
right.
happening right in her space. Um, and I love literature. I still love literature that asks me to think about what's happening to people and with people, and at the same time that I'm understanding what's happening to the land. Because what then ended up happening as a
Mm-hmm.
result, right, of these integration cases was the white flight that then flooded those same areas that Dillard's book um, bemoans the increasing people coming to live in these
Yeah,
empty spaces.
yeah.
Well, they're living there now because they're fleeing the city where they don't want to send their kids to school with Black people. This is the
Mm-hmm.
reason. There's like an actual reason that this
Right.
population explosion is happening right there.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I, I thought that it would be interesting in the 21st century to begin to create texts that were able to be as capacious in uh, attention, the directionality of our attention, as most of us actually are. Right. I'm just going to trust my readers to think that most of us are
Mm-hmm.
thinking about several things at a time, and you can read a book in peace that thinks about several things at a time, and
Yes.
I don't have to have like pocketed, segregated thought processes. And so back to the kind of social justice, environmental justice question, then if I'm talking about land use questions, or I'm talking about how certain animals, how and why certain animals are endangered, I can talk about economic factors and historical factors and cultural and gender factors and all of those other things at the same time that I'm talking about a lovely landscape, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, in listening to you, kind of run through this history of how some of these writings have been separate from the conditions of the times, right? How many of those writers almost seem like they're living in a different space, place, time, and environment that is completely absent of the human condition. Concurrent to that, we have people who are very focused on space control, even with their neighbors, right? So recently, I've read a piece that said that America is exploding with these homeowner associations and these neighborhood associations, yet laws are really kind of, cloudy around their authority.
Mm-hmm.
However, they exercise a lot of authority. And I have a real, like, I live in a homeowner community and I have real mixed emotions about the extent to which, there's like a homeowners association that would manage or um, control how people use the land around their home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had indicated that you had faced some barriers and neighborhood restrictions regarding the type of garden that you wanted to have at your home in Colorado. And that I don't remember off the top of my head if it was an HOA or a neighborhood association, but basically you were like, folks were out measuring blades of grass and, things couldn't, things had to look a certain way. And so could you share with us, like, what was that experience like? And then how did it inform your approach to ultimately creating your garden back then?
Well, bless the spirit of the tape measuring lady. May she
Yes,
rest in a paradise of order.
that's quite some
um,
order. It is amazing, amazing. I had to read it like
that
six
will please
times.
her. Her heaven should not be my heaven, because it would not be heaven for her.
Right.
That version. Um, right. Luckily, I landed in a community that was progressing along the pace of my project. So I started with just a small square in the front yard, because really that's all I had the capacity to do in my first
Mm-hmm.
year. I just thought, I'll just reclaim a little flower bed using these railroad ties that are in the backyard, and make this flower bed area. And then I just kept growing it, and I figured by the time they caught on to the fact that I was trying to reclaim the whole lawn, they would have caught up with the fact that this is really the right thing to do. We're worried about the pollinators. We don't have any water in Colorado. Like, we don't need to be watering lawns. Um, like, everybody's complaining about all the toxins that we live with that create all of our health concerns. And there's one easy fix would be to just not actually spray them perpetually in your own living and recreational space, right? And so there's
Mm-hmm.
all these reasons why having a poison-free, pollinator-friendly, water reduced yard were the right thing. And I was sure that the community would catch up to me. I was right in this case.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a run-in once with the HOA, because I left my um, compost bin in a visible part of my yard. And so even though it was in the backyard, it could be seen from the front. And so I faced a fine until I corrected that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I was lucky. I write in Soil about a woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who came home one day and her entire yard had been bulldozed
Mm.
by order of the city, and
Wow.
so, my $25 a day fine, what that could add up to in a very short period of time. I think my math was about $775 in a month, I mean, which is a
Wow.
substantial amount of money, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, this little risk that I took could be catastrophic. And um and so I hoped that writing the Soil Project could also help normalize and offer hope that this kind of yard can be beautiful. There's an
Yeah.
adjustment about what beauty means, right? But
Right.
that's
Yes.
always the case when you bring diversity in. It requires an adjustment of aesthetics and
Mm-hmm.
an adjustment about what it means to be beautiful and what it means to be practical. And so I I just wanted to contribute to the modeling of that. I mean, the fact is that a lot of native landscaping is really funny looking for a while,
Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's
Yeah.
not it's not ornamental. That's not its job. Um,
Yeah. It's not
but
curated or manicured, right? So
mhm,
it's
mhm.
growing.
And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just you just have to leave the dead heads up so that they
Yeah.
can seed and they can feed the birds, and so that they can replace themselves and establish themselves. Um, And that's not that sort of like, oh, we're finished and then we have to mow it all down and start over again. That's not what native gardening tends to call for. And so
Right.
it it takes me, it still takes me sometimes to just let it be, just chill out. It's gonna be
Mm,
okay, because I wonder, am I being judged?
yeah.
And what that judgment might cost me, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In terms of actual capital or cultural capital.
Mm-hmm. And that community that you once lived in, they changed their rules because of your influence, to my understanding.
Yeah, I don't. I'll take it that it's because of my influence, but I think it's that it's the right thing. and
I
so
hear you. Yeah.
and so the community had adjusted, and so the HOA does no longer has the language in the bylaws about not non-standard landscaping. That language is gone. The city is really pro low water native um, gardening and pollinator friendly gardening. And so the city has a bunch of incentive programs that really support this kind of gardening. So I'm lucky where I landed. I definitely know people in very close proximity to me who
Yeah.
do not have that same kind of power. Or and I own my lawn. If you live in a condo community, you don't really own your
Right.
lawn, so you don't have that,
Right.
so there's like those kinds of, which you also kind of spoke to in the leads to one of your questions just before, was the kind of way that soil in its intersectional thinking is as frequently thinking about um, my choices to do certain things in my yard based on environmental concerns,
Mm-hmm.
or the historical, cultural, gendered, racialized context that could guide or shadow the decisions that I make in my yard, right? And so in terms of I own this packet of land, whatever that means within an American context of settler colonialism, but
Right. Right.
I own the deed to this property, and so therefore my ability to make decisions on this property is really different than people who don't have that kind of agency. And
Yeah.
it was important to me to address that in my book, like not to just sort of accept that privilege of ownership without interrogation of what it costs me and what it affords me, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What amazing stories and layers to these stories that you have. It's so remarkable. And in a recent interview, Camille, you had stated that gardening can be like a balm, a place of rest and beauty. Yet the garden also connects you to the history of enslaved Africans and the indigenous people of America. And we've talked, I think we've kind of touched on some of that in your dialogue points today. But would you share how we can collectively sit with and embrace the duality of space as beauty, but then also as a reminder of our troubled past in this nation? Like, how do we sit and reconcile with that? Now, I'll use myself as an example. I have a hard time sitting down in a garden or in a natural space, largely because I think I should be working, so I always got work to do, right? But I also think of it as leisure, and and I do think about the fact that I'm privileged to be able to engage in that type of leisure, as simplistic as it is. And I think that a lot of people, particularly people of color, really wrestle with that duality. Like, yes, it's a space of rest and beauty, but it's complex because I haven't been conditioned, under this capitalistic environment to just sit and enjoy natural spaces, right? So how do we collectively sit with and hopefully reconcile the complications of those dualities?
Wow. It's a great unlearning, isn't it? Or a
It really
relearning.
is. It
And
really is.
or maybe I would want to think of it more as a like learning to bend toward communion and
Mm.
connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that maybe the work, if you just have to work, like if you just have to work, like if that's like the thing that you gotta do, maybe the work that you're doing right there is reminding yourself of the ancient and sacred connection that all of us are are born from and
Mm.
entitled to, and that was robbed from Black people
Yeah.
actively and um, consciously and insidiously robbed. And so your work right there is to steal back your connection with
Mm.
with
Mm-hmm.
a world that is yours, that is owed to you. um I think also it doesn't it's not always like it's not always easy out there,
Right.
the world is the world is busy, the world is the violent, it is it does need our like cross connection, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's so many things that happen, there's plants that are growing in my garden that yes, they want to just grow free, but they have no natural predators. There's nothing, I don't have any bison. There's no bison here
Right.
to like nibble on
Right.
them. So like I gotta be the bison, I gotta do some trimming. I've got to do the work there to re-inscribe that kind of community and the sort of the growth control and
Mm.
the seed spreading, et cetera, that a lot of the other non-human neighbors who we've eliminated from our spaces can't do because they're not there.
Right.
And
Right.
so there is kind of always work to be done, but sometimes it is just a matter, the work is just looking and being
Yeah.
and appreciating rest. There's nothing in the natural world that doesn't rest. That's one thing that
Right.
that working so closely with nature has taught me. And so I don't think I am as averse to rest. My husband just walked in and sort of could not control himself from laughing when I said that. But I try not to be as averse to rest because it's winter here. The plants are dormant. They're not dead. They're not gone. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're they're waiting. They're like there's no point in them exerting their energy right now. There's not enough
Right.
sun. There's not enough heat. So they're just gonna chill until there is enough sun and enough heat, right? And so that's the like learning that lesson for me for all things. Like if I'm like kind of pushing at something and it's not working, maybe just that's not the thing right now, and I'll just turn away and do something else until there is enough sun and enough heat for that project to do its thing. And so I've come to appreciate the time that I spend out there for the ways that I've learned to be I don't think it's a matter of learning to be a better person. I think it's
Yes.
just learning to be more fully, fully, just naturally who I can be.
Yeah. 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 And even today in 2024, that remains the big work, right?
Oh, so
Is to
hard.
just settle in re-engagement with the earth, re-engagement with place and space, and just settle on being who we are, in connection to all that surrounds us. That is such an incredible thing to think about. Absolutely.
Mhm, mhm.
Absolutely. Camille, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
It was really delightful. Thank you for your wonderful questions and for helping walk me through my little thoughts today with my stuffed up nose. So I
Oh,
appreciate you.
absolutely. And I appreciate you as well. Thank you so much again. This was such a treat to talk to you. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Thank you.